To start off with, you are going to be using pencil on an 11 by 14 paper. And I am outlining this in pencil, but it is super hard to see, so I'm putting this in time lapse so you can see me do it quickly. And this is a cylinder, but I am going to demonstrate how to do all of them just as a refresher. Now, I do want to remind you that you want to put the background line either at the top third or at the bottom third of your paper. In this case, I moved it up to the top third. Here I am outlining it with charcoal, which is something you don't have to do. I'm doing that so you can see my strokes on camera. You do have to outline a cast shadow. So you have your object, background, and cast shadow. You're also going to go to your object and you're going to plan ahead at where those value shifts are going to occur. Now, you're not going to establish every single one of them because there are many value and temperature shifts that happen. So I am going to have you do those lines on there to indicate a change in value. And I'm doing that by looking at the photo reference and looking for any place where the value shifts. And I'm going to be actually outlining this kind of like paint by number. So I'm going to be assigning each value a number, with 10 being the darkest value, 1 being the lightest. So I'm just kind of working my way backwards from 10. You can see the background's 10. The cast shadow is an 8 to a 7. Well, actually, it starts at 9 to an 8 to a 7. Remember about cast shadows is they fade as they go away from the form. So those stripes really help. Now there are kind of there is a gradient between stripes. So it doesn't just go from 3 to 2. There's kind of like a in-between value. And you don't want those stripes to show at the end of the painting process. You want to cover those. The whole point to this is to give you kind of like a visual roadmap. And this is something that I would say is for beginners specifically. As you develop your skills, you don't have to necessarily do this, but I'm doing it to help simplify the value structure so you have a good value hierarchy before you begin to paint. I'm even assigning value to the foreground, which is the table plane that the object is sitting on. I also want to show you what it looks like on a cone. And again, same kind of rule where you would begin with figuring out where you want to put the horizon line. It's either going to be on the bottom third or at the top third. You want to avoid the middle. And to do a cone, you actually kind of start with a triangle shape. And I accidentally cut off a little of the bottom of this clip. But below there, I'm making it into a triangle, but then I'm curving the bottom. It is important that the bottom of the cone is curved. And in order to make a perfect triangle, I did pretty much an upside down T shape. And then I connected up diagonal lines to the point of the T, and then I erased that vertical axis. If you'd like me to show you that, it's not that complicated. I'm happy to do so. And then you are getting stripes on here too, but you have to make sure that the stripes radiate from the tip of the cone. And those stripes signal a change in value. So I have quite a few there. Looks like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You could probably fit in more than that. And I'm assigning value to the background. And just like I said, 10 is the darkest, and then 1 is the lightest. And even on the cast shadow, there is an 8 there, but that 8 fades to a 7 as it moves away from the cone form itself. And I like to work my way backwards. So I go to the darkest values first, and then I figure it out that way. And you don't always have to use all 10 values, but it's nice to. You'll have a form that is more 3D. You're using the principles of chiaroscuro, light and dark, to model the form. And on there, it's a little bit tricky because that's a gradient. So it's going from a 7 to a 6 to a 4. And then you're going to probably ask, like, how can you jump from a 6 to a 4? But really, there's a 5 in between the 6 and the 4. It's just a transition, like an ombre in between those. It just fades. One color fades into the next. And it is important to understand where your light's coming from, because your shadows are going to be opposite of where the light is. So the light on this one is coming from the right, which means the cast shadow is leaning left. And again, I'm identifying this kind of like paint by number, just to figure out the value pattern. Here is choice number 3. It's pretty easy to do. All I'm doing here is tracing a palette to get the right size. By the way, you do want these pretty big. You want them to be like, this is 7 inches. The one before that was 9 inches. The one before that was 8 inches in height. So these do have to be of a certain size. They can't be tiny or petite on your paper. And then what I'm doing here is I'm outlining the cast shadow, the background line or horizon line, and then I'm outlining all those shifts in value. There's not really a line there, it's just a value shift, but I'm outlining it so I can help it, so it'll help me visualize where the shadow is going to go, the form shadow on that sphere. Think back to all those terms we talked about when we were doing forms in charcoal, that you have to have a cast shadow, which is the shadow on the ground, the form shadow, which is the shadow on the object itself. You have midtones, you have reflected light, and you have highlight, the highlight. So you do need to incorporate all of those. That's what the value system of putting all those little paint by numbers is supposed to help you with, is to visualize where those go. And you always want to remind yourself too, if you're doing reflected light, like this sphere has obvious reflected light, that you make sure the reflected light is 1 degree darker than your midtones. You don't want it to be the same value as your midtones. It's a little bit darker because that's light that's bouncing from the ground plane onto the object itself. And I would draw this light. I'm doing this in charcoal so that you guys can see it. I recommend you draw it lightly. You can actually, instead of doing numbers, you can also write mid-tone, cast shadow, form shadow, highlight on there if you wanted. But that's not a requirement. I thought the numbers might make it easier. We are going to be selecting a specific color scheme, so I'm going to give you like 4 options to choose from or more. And then you're going to choose one of those color schemes to try out on this. Please have me check your drawing before moving on to paint.